back, guys, to TheSpurgeonPiper. This is Wilson with you. So I don't think most of us like to argue. And in fact, we tend to avoid it at all costs. And I think for a couple of good reasons. One is the way it looks on ourselves, the way it gives us an image of character. We think of politicians who argue on the main stage, and that tends to go very poorly. We think of the political pundits on news media outlets that argue about those politicians or their stances, and they usually don't handle it well. We think of the family member, our friend, who we know just argues about anything and everything. And so we think, well, therefore, we need to not argue because of that. But then also, we don't like the outcome, whether it's feelings or what it does to our friends or family. We're at the dinner table, we're at that holiday gathering, and what are we told? Hey, don't bring up religion, don't bring up politics. But occasionally it does, especially if we have that friend or family member who is prone to do so. And it comes up, we have that sick feeling in our stomach, maybe, where, it's like you're going downhill on a roller coaster. At least that's how I get. And, we want to steer clear of that issue at all costs, and so we try to steer the other direction. Very understandable reasons, and we should learn from those, no doubt. But with all that said, I think it is very virtuous that we argue. It's very virtuous that we argue with virtue. And so that's what I want to argue, no pun intended, with this video, is explain why I think it's virtuous. It's needed. It's healthy to argue for our society, for our families, for ourselves. But let me explain what I don't mean. I don't mean just quarreling about simple matters, especially insignificant matters. And we may have in mind the family member, the coworker, the friend who does this, or the typical stereotype of the husband and wife arguing about something. We should stay clear of such insignificant issues. We should be slow to speak, slow to become angry, not seeking disagreements for the sake of having a disagreement. That is a poor view of character, and we should steer clear of those matters. We should be very cautious to speak on matters when we either don't know it well, or we need to check our motive. Am I arguing simply to argue? And that is a lot of those who we think of. That is often why we have such a poor view of argument, because that's what we see. That's what catches our eye on social media or on news outlets. Secondly, and really related to this, I am not talking about the benefit of arguing online or social media. In fact, I think a lot of the reasons why we have such a negative view, a lot of reasons why we want to avoid argumentation, is because what we see on social media. I'd argue it's led to the downgrade of healthy arguments, a healthy view of argumentation and debate, because the personal factor of conversing is removed from the equation. When you and I argue online, we are arguing against a screen, not a person. We're arguing against a block of code and not someone with value and inherent dignity. And so when that happens, we tend to throw out, even if we try not to, even if we think we don't want to do this, it's easy for us to throw out character attacks, or it's easy to throw up straw man arguments, so being straw man as far as throwing up arguments that have no basis, they're a misrepresentation of the other person. So there's that side of it, but then also, we don't think about this with online arguments, we have at our fingertips with our computers, our phones, we have at our fingertips loads of information, encyclopedias, and that's not natural when you and I argue in person. One of us usually doesn't go, hold up, and we draw out books or pull out books and start gathering information. That's very impractical. And so social media argumentation is just not realistic. It doesn't fit with you and I conversing one-on-one in discussion. So rarely do I have arguments online. Not always. Sometimes I break that rule, but most of the time I won't, because I don't tend to find it helpful. Even if I feel like my point was made, or if I feel like I won, well, it doesn't lead to a good ending. So I'm definitely not encouraging that. I think we should get off usually on social media when it comes to arguing. It usually doesn't end well. But why we should? Why do I think we should argue? Well, number one, it sharpens our minds. It sharpens our minds. It sharpens our understanding of our own viewpoint. when you are attacked, it breaks down your bubble comfort, your bubbly comfort zone, your worldview a bit. It is attacked. It's showing where you might have weaknesses, just like your armor being attacked, and showing where it might have flaws. It doesn't mean your understanding's wrong. It doesn't mean your viewpoint is wrong, but maybe you didn't understand it clearly. And then on the flip side, it helps us understand our opponent's viewpoint or our friend or family. I don't want to just say opponent like they're an enemy, but it helps us understand the other person's viewpoint. Do we understand their viewpoint right, or are we making straw men? I have this view of them and I'm going to use it to attack them, but when in fact that was a false view of what they believe. One thing I try to teach my congregation at my church when we are having more of a laid-back kind of Q&A style discussions is I want to represent the view that I think is wrong as best possible, as truthful as possible, so much that if that person who holds that view was sitting in the congregation in the pew, they would think, wow, Wilson, thank you for representing me well. You explained it just like I would explain it. That should be our viewpoint when we do discuss. Am I representing my viewpoint well? Am I representing the other viewpoint well as well? That is a way to sharpen our minds, and argumentation does that. Greg Koukl, who speaks on worldviews and he speaks on argumentation, he says that when arguments are few, error abounds. I think we see that in our society. We have shut down a lot of argumentation and one side takes control, and when that occurs, error abounds. Your side, our side, whatever debate there is going on, error tends to grow. It tends to prosper, and we want the opposite to occur. We want truth to prosper, and we want healthy dialogue to make sure that we have a good understanding. But secondly, it sharpens our character. This is one thing I'm really teaching with my kids. Disagreements should decrease our pride and increase our humility. You know what? That point you mentioned of what I stand on, I was wrong. Yeah, you got it. I didn't understand it correctly, and so I need to either restructure what I think or make sure I have a better foundation. So thank you for bringing that up. That's one thing helpful with argumentation. It helps, it guides, especially when we have a healthy view of why we're arguing. It helps to decrease pride, increase our humility, open up our ability to be wrong. And that's a great character trait that we should hold. Also makes us more understanding. Instead of blasting out, well, I hate that person for what they believe. Well, first off, I don't want to attack the person. I want to attack the view they hold. And secondly, maybe I don't understand exactly what they believe. Maybe going back to strawman arguments, maybe I thought they believed this, but I actually don't. I was presupposing that. And so they argue and they give their viewpoint, and hey, I have more understanding of what they believe. And with more understanding, well, conflicts tend to simmer when we have a grasp of what we believe of one another's views. Lastly, why I think we should argue. We need to cultivate a culture with the capability of disagreeing without losing control of emotions and taking things personally. This is just a marker of our society now. And it goes on both sides, political parties, religious sides, societal issues altogether. This is occurring. There's been multiple professors or speakers who are speaking at a university, and they are taken out of their speaking responsibility, or there's just simply a big uprising, making sure their voice is not heard. That's not healthy. This goes back to making sure we understand another's viewpoints. It goes back to this core issue of pride in our hearts, where we don't want other person to share their view because we think they're right. And what happens? Error abounds. And that doesn't tend to make a healthy society. It never makes a healthy society. Lindsay Rawls, she writes on the virtue of argument, and she says that the four classical virtues of wisdom, justice, moderation, and courage are on display when we argue virtuously. In regards to why we argue, our students should argue in a way that moves their audience towards an increase in wisdom and love of justice. We should have an increase of love of wisdom and a love of justice. We should pursue those two things. We care about justice no matter where you fall. And so if we care about justice, there should be a room for argument, for the defense of truth. And to defend truth, we should do so with wisdom. And virtuous argument should protect that. But then also, and she goes on to say, in effort to move their audience towards agreement, an individual who's arguing virtuously should avoid extremes, maintain their composure, and argue calmly. They should display the virtue of moderation. So let me ask you, do you think you argue with moderation? One thing I notice, and especially this is at worst on social media, is character attacks go on. And you can just even sense through the screen, through typing, you can sense the emotions rising, don't they? We don't have moderation. We don't have self-control. We just let our emotions control us, and then we argue horribly. And then going back to why then we want to shut down argumentation and debate, because it just gets ugly. But I think we need to cultivate this culture of argumentation. Let's not flee from it. Let's handle it wisely. It is a great, sharp tool to be used that can be very dangerous, but to be very helpful at the same time. So how do you view argumentation? Where do you see there's benefits and drawbacks? Maybe this is an argument we should have. And you can feel free to leave your views below. Well, guys, that's all I have. I hope this gives you something to think about, to meditate over, and I hope to get some feedback on it. That's all I have for today. I hope you're good. I hope you're blessed, and we'll talk to you very soon.